Hello again. Hello again. And I do have my timer on because I really do try to make these an hour. I really do give it an attempt. And some weeks are better than others. I'm really glad you're back with me. And hello if you've ever been here before, that's fine too. But mostly hello to my disability class. Really thrilled to still have you. I've made a couple changes to this week's presentation, I guess, because I originally had it valenced in a direction of policymaking that ends up going toward a fail state. And there are a ton of reasons for that. So the readings on the syllabus are about the CCAA insolvency process that are happening at Laurentian right now. And I've decided, based on the last week of stories after the big Harvard drama, which we can go into if you're somehow unfamiliar, but pretty sure you're familiar, there were a lot of really interesting stories that came of that, of people who were speaking of really similar scenarios to what I'm telling you about here. And that is really significant because these stories that I'm doing with you this week are really, really hard to find in places where it can be tracked. So there's a phenomenon where you hear about it or you hear rumors of it happening, but it's a swept under the rug kind of university secret issue. And I would love to go over that issue with you, obviously. But all these stories that came out as a result of that are disabled students or mentally ill students saying, you know, the don't ask, don't tell around mental illness and expulsion happened at my school, happened at my school, happened at my school. And I wish that had happened when I was creating your syllabus, but it didn't. So it happened this week, so I'm going to get you a couple other examples of the moment to follow up this presentation that you'll read. I'll put them on the Discord. And then this version of the presentation is from 2021. So these are older stories, obviously, but the stories still work insofar as all of those policies are still current. And we could do it for any school in your imagination. We could do Western, we could do U of T, we could do UBC, we could do U of A, we could do UW. Doesn't matter. These ones are about, I think it's 2 Canadian schools and an American school. But you can do it anywhere, I think is the point I'm making. The other pivot, no, that's the only pivot, but then I wanted to do a content warning for suicidal ideation and sudden death and trauma and suicide attempts and drug abuse. Kind of a heavy presentation. So I tell you every week, you know, if this is a presentation where you need to set up a safety team or decompression for after you watch this, it would be a good idea to pause right now and do that. I'm hoping this presentation is 55 minutes, but it's going to be around there. So if you pause and say, would I be able to call you X person on my safety team in an hour? I think I'd like to maybe talk some things out or be distracted or just calm down or everything from it. And I have a safety team set up for after this presentation because this is my least favorite talk to give. I've only given it twice. I did it at WCAC last year and I did it for a private event at UW, and that's the only 2 times I've done this talk because it's really hard. And it takes a lot of my own lived experience. So I'm hoping, in honoring the cozy space that I've taught you so well, that you will handle the presentation with a little bit of extra gentleness because I'm giving you some information from my own life and from my own history. And it's not like a fun story. Very few of my stories are fun, but it still hurts. 10 years later, 11 years later, you know? Some stuff just doesn't go away. And I feel as though the information is being used for good, and I'm very cognizant of where I put this information, because I think there's a lot of conversations we can have about lived experience and disclosure. But this isn't the right venue for that, and suffice to say, I would like you to hold this presentation very gently and empathically. And that's not to say don't ask any questions about it, because you absolutely can. It's just holding a little bit of extra sensitivity, because I do find giving the Students Left Behind lecture really difficult. Okay? Awesome. This was originally a dissertation chapter I pitched, and I don't think it's making it into the final version. It just has very little to do with what I'm writing about now. But a lot of this ended up with some really good conversations with people from other schools that I kind of interviewed about how this transpired for them. So it's a lot of research that went into how the policy enacted itself in different places with different clauses, and I called those clauses enablement policies. So I'm going to walk you through 4 lived experiences, including mine, the policy that was at that institution, and then the enablement clause that allows the school to expel problem students. That's kind of the basis of Students Left Behind. Okay? If you need to pause, take a break, set up, safety team, set up decompression, whatever. I'm set up, so it's not just you, it's me too. You know, we're in this together. All right, I'm going to do housekeeping. How much time do I have left? I've almost done 10 minutes already. I already did the trigger warnings. This version of the presentation still is welcome to WCAC. It's a great conference for those of you who are starting to think about going to conferences. I do a lot of the work for the Canadian panels. It's a open access conference entirely for people who identify with the working class and the working class academic experience, because as you know, the working class is not really meant to be an academic space, and a lot of the material that gets shared in that space is trying to infiltrate, you know, higher level or higher class space, and some of the productive things you can do with that infiltration. Okay, so that's my pitch that nobody asked for, but everyone's getting anyway, about WCAC. I'm not going to do the rest of that. There is a transcript for this presentation, and you know that I always subtitle them. I will correct the subtitles right after this is done. Table of contents. I've switched to slide 3. Slide 3 literally just says table of contents. Part 1. Excuse me, autoethnography. That's a fancy way of saying my story or my lived experience. We call that autoethnography because it wouldn't be academia if we didn't make up more complicated words for less complicated things. My story happens at the Université Laurentian, also Laurentian University. I just happen to be in a French program, so my mind automatically associates that school with its French name, obviously, but we can call it Laurentian. Part 2 is taking that event and then placing it in other institutions. So we've got Chatham University, UAlberta, Virginia Tech, Trinity Western, Utah, Yale. Not all of those universities appear in this presentation, but those are the universities where I got to interview people. So some of their stories are here, okay? Part 3 is the structural stigma and why these inclusion policies are a thing at all, because some of it may strike you when it's put in this light specifically as, wow, that's kind of ableist or anti-mental illness. But when you're not looking at it in that light, these behavioral clauses can look pretty benign. So I do have space for that. And then the afterword, this is not a live presentation, so there is no afterword, but our Monday discussion, obviously, you can have your afterword with me then. Or if you want to message me or DM me or email me, that's all fine too. Okay? Cool. So, I'm on a slide. It's a title slide. It says Part 1, Autoethnography. What is autoethnography again? Lived experience. My lived experience. Right? Okay. So this is Laurentian. That is me from a long time ago. I think I don't look like that anymore. But a lot of people say that I look exactly the same as I did in high school. So maybe there's some accuracy there. That was my first year roommate. Her name was Zabrina. She was in forensic psychology. I was in French language concurrent education with I wanted to do the special ed certificate as well, which is kind of weird because now I'm doing disability studies. So it kind of all comes back in a big loop. I didn't mean to do that. So I'm just thinking about that now, like, oh, that's weird. Anyway, Zabrina and I were placed in residence as roommates in first year. So we just got to university. You have the whole experience of moving up to Sudbury. And for those of you not in Ontario, that's like hella north, 5 hours north of Toronto. And we had a fabulous time. We were really close. It was awesome. She was the best. And then when we came back from Christmas vacation, I got back to campus from Barrie, and she never arrived. And we eventually found out that she had been killed in a car accident on the way back to campus with a couple of our other friends. Keegan, Melville, Emily was in the car, but she survived, and a girl I didn't know named Hillary. So 2 people from our friend group were killed, and I was really, really, really drastically close to Zabrina. So that was not a good day, or a good week, or a good month, or a good year, obviously. And the problem with what transpired thereafter, and some of you from more southern universities might think this is a bit weird, but Laurentian hadn't had a death on campus in something stupid like 8 years or something, and somebody can correct me on that if they actually have the data for that. Maybe Ruben does. So the deaths of Keegan and Hillary and Zabrina were a really, really, really huge deal. And the roommate of Keegan agreed to go home right away because he had a stable family life and a stable home life, and he had somewhere secure to be, and he wanted to get away from campus, and that was fine. And Hillary didn't have a roommate, to my memory, and the problem was that because I was from a not good home situation, I didn't have somewhere else to go. So in the regular, marketing of universities as your home away from home, which you may have seen in like residence ads and stuff, that was not my home away from home. That was my home, period. That's it. Right? Like I wasn't away from anything. So when I wouldn't go home when this whole thing broke, and you put these mega spotlights on the students who were directly impacted by this sudden death moment, it created a lot of really intense drama at this really small French school because they weren't quite sure what to do with survivors. And survivors is being used very loosely there because it's not like I was ever in the car. Emily was in the hospital for a while and then she went right home. But I didn't go home. I wanted to stay at Laurentian. They gave me 2 30-minute sessions of counseling, and they said I couldn't go to class, I could no longer stay on my residence because it was upsetting, and I was also upset. So they moved me into a hotel. And the problem with agreeing to move off campus is once they have you off campus, they basically have you. But 19-year-old Sarah didn't know that that whole dynamic was a thing. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So in these compliance policies, when they move me off campus, a whole bunch of things start happening really fast. And they're telling me to my face, we're putting you in a hotel for your safety. We want you to make sure that you're not, I don't even know what they said. They said something like, campus might be upsetting or something. And I was like, I'd really rather go to class or do anything other than sit in this hotel room and be sad. And that wasn't happening. And they had a bunch of teachers, or I had to approach a bunch of teachers and have them write for me about whether or not I should be allowed to attend classes. Because not only was I traumatized by the event, but my presence as someone who has now become really well known for being the roommate of the dead girl on a small campus where I am recognizable everywhere, created a lot of drama around whether or not I should be allowed in the classroom, because that could be triggering for other students who would see me and think of the death of Zabrina. I'm not saying what they did was right. I'm just narrating what happened. So most of my teachers said, no, go home, please don't come to my class. One of my teachers, bless his heart, Reuben Roth, wrote for me for this closed council meeting and said she should get to stay here. Obviously, she should get to take classes. And the problem with those meetings is that they're closed board. So what that means, if you're familiar with like in-camera processes, if you're all into, business rhetoric, is that only certain people are allowed to be there. So I could submit a statement that said, I really feel, I'm obviously really upset, but I'd really like to stay here and I'm not running around threatening people, but they never get to hear directly from me. And in the fine print, there is a fairness clause that says that I should have representation, but I was not given that representation, and they assumed that I wouldn't go back to the policy and read that I should be given representation. So I had nobody representing me there until the GSA president, the student president, offered to go make a statement for me, because it was in the student newspapers what was happening to me, so it was all public and out there. It was wild. So Charlie goes to the meeting, and Reuben Roth submits a statement for me, and they made a petition that said, on my residence, that said, I don't feel frightened of Sarah. I don't think Sarah is going to hurt me, because they were sending me statements to the hotel that said that I was a risk to others, and they don't want me to come back to residence. So then the in-camera sessions became about whether or not I should be allowed to continue going to the school after I had been kicked from residence for not hurting anybody. And over the course of board meetings, they kept sending me letters that said, you failed this board meeting, you weren't successful in this board meeting. And there was really nothing I could do about it. So that's where this slide comes in. That's all the backstory you need to understand the clusterfuck that became me getting expelled from this university. So in 4.4 of the Behavioral Conduct Code, it says the university is committed to procedural fairness in the application of the code, ensuring that students are aware of their rights. Whether or not you can enforce that is a different issue. Are informed of any complaint against them, including its nature and the details presented by the complainant, the deadlines, the identity of the complainant, the right to respond, and the right to appeal. I was given none of that. Like, that, for whatever reason, did not apply to me in any sense. So I wasn't given representation. I wasn't told who the complainants were. I was told that there were board meetings full of people deciding whether or not I was crazy and whether or not I should be allowed to be at the school. But I had no right to respond. I didn't get to appeal. I didn't even get to go. So I just had, my student body president, who was awesome. I was on good terms with him. But he says, you're getting railroaded. You're getting screwed pretty hard here. So when there's a complaint placed against you, but you're not even sure what the complaint is, it's really hard to tell your president, I don't even know what you should be saying at this meeting because I'm not quite sure why they don't want me here, beyond I'm traumatizing other students with my presence. And the fact that I was traumatized was, I guess, irrelevant, but that's okay. Point 7.4, also from the conduct code, is 2 procedural fairness when a complaint is made under the code, including 7.4.1, which was earlier, the right to be fully informed of the nature and details of the complaint, including the identity of the complainant. So this is more stuff they have to tell you when they're kicking you out. And my assertion is, they didn't tell me shit. So the right to have an agent present during all stages of the complaint process, they just put me up in a hotel and said, you'll be fine, stay here, don't go to class, you're not allowed on residence. And I said, fine. The right to be provided with an opportunity to respond, didn't happen. The right to an appeal of a misconduct finding, didn't have that. They sent me my expulsion letter, and because I was 19 and not very intelligent, I just looked at that expulsion letter and I said, okay, I guess I'm done here. I'm kicked out. And that was really sad, obviously. And you'll hear, in instances like these, if you've heard this kind of thing happening before, you will hear these very insidious claims like, this is a one-off failing, or this was the fault of whoever was at the meeting who didn't understand the rules, or, you know, this is all the proceedings executed to the best of their knowledge and they weren't sure what to do. My argument is, it's always been designed to work like that. As soon as they told me to go to a hotel, they knew that I was being railroaded for expulsion, and I was the only one in the room who didn't know that. And I can prove it to you, okay? So now I've got what I call the enablement policy, or the actual offense you can commit that lets them send you that expulsion letter. And I'll show you in every instance where this enablement policy is. So in 8.3, there's engage in language or behavior that causes one or more persons to fear for their safety or the safety of people known to them, or adversely affect their freedom. So if they're feeling traumatized by my presence, that's a me problem. And because of the very, very small and insular nature of campus, my presence on that campus was causing issues. When they had the public funeral on campus, again, this is a small school. I know we don't have funerals for students in southern universities, but we did at Laurentian. They banned me from the funeral, and that was devastating, right? Because it was my best friend, and I wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. And they said that my presence at that event would be too upsetting, or I would encourage people to self-harm. And, you know, people who are into medical humanities or health humanities know that, or even if you've taken a cyst, you know that self-harm doesn't work like that. You don't see someone harming themselves or talking about suicidal ideation and they think, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to think about that too. We've proven that. But there's, you know, that mythology, that master narrative that goes about, and my university believed if they saw me, they would think those things, which is awful. So then, as a subclause of that, if I assault or threaten someone, which I did not, but they had they sent around a petition saying I had never done any of those things. I was not dangerous, even though I had a mental illness diagnosis. So they were very easily able to say I was dangerous. And 8.3.5, creating a condition that unnecessarily endangers the health or safety of another person. That's the reason on my expulsion letter why I was expelled. That sucks, right? Because the burden of proof for that is pathetic. So if I'm making other people feel uncomfortable or suicidal or like they're unsafe, they can boot me from the school. That's the enablement policy. So I was kicked out. I ended up going to Laurier because Laurier was the only school who would take me. Shout out to Laurier because I got to keep going for school. So you may be thinking, and this is exactly what they told me when they wrote to me a year later to say, sorry, that was really shitty. That's really unfortunate, but it seems like a one-time misunderstanding. There's no way that this happens on a regular basis, you know? And I can show you, based on people I've spoken to, that that's not true. That was that clause working as designed to get me out of that space. So everything from here on out is anonymized, obviously. This is from Chatham University. These were 2 students who faced disciplinary action because they chose to express suicidal thoughts at the Student Mental Health Center, or the Student Wellness Center, or the Student Health Services, whatever it's called at your school. So because they disclosed suicidal ideation, they were asked to go on leave. And they were later expelled for it, which is terrible. But once you're put on leave, that was the same thing as putting me in a hotel. Once they've done that, you're being railroaded, and often the students are told and comforted that this is all for your benefit. It's all going to be okay. I'm so sorry this happened. But what they're actually doing is getting you off campus so that all of your problems are no longer associated with the namesake value of that university. Okay? So their enablement policy was in what was called their honor code, which is kind of like a student code of conduct. So, quote, according to the honor code at Chatham University, students can be removed from campus housing or expelled for self-injury, expressing suicidal thoughts or threats, or attempting suicide. The policy explicitly states that mental health conditions or the use of drugs will not diminish or excuse a violation of the honor code. So A, ableist as hell, but B, you can be expelled for expressing suicidal thoughts. So something I've made a really big deal about when I'm talking to other teachers and professors from other schools is if you have a student who's disclosing those thoughts to you, don't send them to health services because they will be arrested and they will be told to leave. You have ended their school career because we have policies that will remove these students from the student pipeline. They will not graduate if you can catch them doing this, which strikes you as kind of the opposite of helping the student, right? And you could make the argument, you know, maybe we want to go get them help. Or maybe we're hoping if we kick them out of school, they'll go to the hospital or something. And you could make that argument, but I don't think that's the argument these policies are making. The argument these policies are making is you can have a mental health crisis, but you can't have a mental health crisis here. This is not the place to do that. And I guess my argument to that is if you're going to market your university as a home away from home and offer counseling, offer grief services, offer on-campus residences, you have a duty to those students to help them when things, you know, go sideways. You can't only host happy students, particularly in coronavirus, right? Nothing did a better job of creating unhappy students than the pandemic, and I get it. So that was Chelsea and Tiffany, and here's a couple more circumstances that added to it, so to illustrate their story a little more without giving too much away. So this is from an article that they did anonymously. The semester before Chelsea's mental health crisis, another Chatham student died by suicide, or we say now completed suicide, but this is an older article, off campus. Chelsea thinks that suicide, combined with a friend feeling distressed over her text messages and visiting student health services, played a role in the way events unfolded. Prior to her resignation, Tiffany visited Western Psych and sought counseling on Chatham's campus. She liked her counselor, but felt she couldn't be completely honest with her. After she asked if administrators would be informed if she expressed suicidal intent, she says the counselor didn't guarantee confidentiality. And we know that as the confidentiality clause, right? With a senior thesis to defend and finals to take, telling a truth wasn't a risk she felt she could take. And this is a direct quote from Tiffany. I didn't hurt anybody, I didn't threaten anybody, I wasn't a danger to anyone, and I was still doing all the things I was supposed to be doing. I think they could have just let me have access to my school and my resources that I paid for instead of trying to scare me, instead of trying to make my life more difficult than it already was. This is a really complicated quote, and I'm not going to be able to honor all the complexity of this quote in what looks like 2.5 minutes, but suffice to say, there's a dynamic that's created here that they're hoping you don't notice between we are here for you, we want you to have good mental health, we want to give you the resources to do well at this university. And then on the other side here, and I'm holding my hands kind of axiomatically, the other side is our university is creating conditions of poor mental health by over-enrolling you in courses, by charging you too much tuition, by, making you stay with strangers and hoping you guys just work it out, by making it really difficult to have a life outside of the studying context. And all of these factors contribute to really poor feelings of self-safety, right? We wouldn't blame any undergraduate for having poor mental health given the conditions we make undergraduates do their degree in. So if you combine that with an external crisis, like your roommate dying in a car accident or having suicidal thoughts, I think in this story, Chelsea's mother died, and she was having a really poor time trying to come to terms with that. And all of the things they said on this side about we'll help you, we're here for you, we have counseling, we have grief. If you're too complicated for the help they offer, they are no longer offering help. So this falls by the wayside, and they start taking clauses that allow them to get you off campus. Because once you're off campus, you are not that university's problem. And that's what they don't want you to notice when they're saying things like, we're here for you, we care about your health, we're compassionate about it. And they'll make the argument that they shouldn't be doing grief counseling or mental health counseling because that's not what a university is for. And that's a complicated argument too, right? I think that if you're creating conditions of strife, you are responsible for the strife that you've caused as a result of that. And if there are external factors, you can't ban every student whose mom died or ban every student who loses friends. You can't do that. But the way they can ostensibly ban those circumstances is with behavioral codes of conduct. As soon as you admit to feeling suicidal, as soon as you make a really convoluted statement about feeling unwell or unsafe, you're done there. They're gonna send you home and you're not gonna be allowed to come back. And I think that's really immoral, right? And obviously the people in these stories think that's immoral too. So I'm gonna give you another one. This is Eric from the University of Alberta. On the right-hand side here is a screen capture of his letter of expulsion. So he was kicked right out. He was told to go home from the University of Alberta. And I'm reading directly from the letter. Quote, "This letter is intended to summarize our meeting on October 28th, 2016. There is no fucking way he was at that meeting. That would have been another closed door meeting, okay? I communicated at the beginning of the meeting that our purpose was to determine if you were in breach of your residence agreement or a student conduct code. Specifically, you admitted to attempting to commit self-harm within your residence, and this was the second attempt. Blah, blah, blah. The type of example your actions support have no place in an academic learning environment." And they're making a really rhetorically murky decision here to equivocate residence with the academic learning environment. And there could be a whole presentation just on that, because I think that's bullshit. But suffice to say, Eric has admitted in closed settings that he has, I think what he did was cut himself on multiple occasions, and they expelled him for it. So I've got some bullet points here. It says the administrator handed the student a trespass and an eviction letter that said you admitted to attempting to commit self-harm within your residence. The letter also said the type of example your actions support have no place here. Officials at U of A haven't explained how the decision could have been approved. Kostopoulos wouldn't comment on the specifics of Eric's case, but said it's possible the decision was based on erroneous information. So this is one of the only times I've actually seen this story in the news. This was on the CBC a little while ago, and the whole debate was about whether the school should have mobilized self-harm resources for Eric as opposed to expelling him or telling him that is your fucking problem, do that shit off campus. Which is probably the most amoral response you can have to someone feeling bad enough that they're harming themselves on your campus, right? So what you're hoping happens is that the residence advisor and health services and a counselor all get together and do what's called a circle of support. So in a university like Wilfrid Laurier, they'll grab people from different committees and make sure that that student has the resources they need to be stabilized. Okay, and something as, it's still serious, but not as serious as an expulsion warrants. Should not be an evictable offense. So because they chose not to do that circle of care and instead shipped Eric the fuck off campus and said, go deal with it, Eric went to the news saying, the University of Alberta is saying they'll take care of me, saying wellness is important, and, it's really tough here to learn. And then as soon as I have a problem, they tell me to go home. That's really tough. I'm just going to let that sit. I don't want to, tell you what to think, but I do want you to think about that a little bit. I'll give you another one. Trinity Western. This is Leah. Leah has gone on record, so that's not her real name, but that really is her picture. And Leah said she had endured weeks of mocking comments from classmates about sexual assault and mental illness. The cruel jokes only intensified on the road trip, she said, and she fell into crisis. For the next week, the then 20-year-old remained hospitalized, unaware that university officials were planning to expel her from the school for excessive alcohol consumption and abuse of prescription drugs in her suicide attempt. Her actions, the school said in 2018, showed an inability to self-regulate and to take responsibility for her actions and the consequences thereof. So what happened to Leah was she was raped off campus, and instead of being given resources or that surround support that I was talking to you about, she was given nothing. She had a 15-minute counseling session, and they were like, that's a lot. So she started drinking too much, and they called it a suicide attempt, but she just took a prescription she was already taking in connection with alcohol, which I'm on prescriptions, and I'm super guilty of that. I have definitely had a drink with my prescriptions. They called that a suicide attempt, and they told her to go home. So she was raped, she was hospitalized, she was drinking with her prescription, and they said, she has no ability to self-regulate, she cannot study here. Horrendous. All of these stories are horrendous. I really need to hit home with you that this is not how you treat people who are in crisis. But this is over and over and over again how universities treat people if you're in crisis. This is probably the last thing she wanted to hear after she was released from the hospital, that she was expelled from her program, right? That is not what I wanted to hear 2 weeks after my best friend died, that I was expelled from my school. That sucked, Not what you want. Couple other things. This is again from Leah's story. Students with complaints about their school's response to their mental health accommodation requests, and this changed a little bit in coronavirus, and I will acknowledge that. I don't think it's better, but it has changed a little. I'm quoting again, mental health accommodation requests typically file appeals first with their academic department. For example, a student may ask a professor to retake a failed exam or submit late without penalty to avoid probation or expulsion for having poor grades. When those requests are denied, the last resort on campus is a complaint to internal appeals, often overseen by Senate or governing council. If that appeal fails, as many do, a student's last and final step is to file a human rights complaint to provincial tribunals. A review of a dozen human rights complaints across Canada filed by students against their educational institutions alleging failure to accommodate their mental health needs showed all but one were partially or fully dismissed. And it's important to know that that one was still being adjudicated at the time, and that's why there's the one, and then they ended up failing too. So we've gone 0 for 12 in people who appeal that the university wasn't fair to their mental health crisis, and every single time that goes to human rights tribunal, the student is found guilty. So the university, policy-wise, is allowed to do this. If you get yourself into shit, or you have something really bad happen to you at the university, and you let the university know that, they have the right to expel you, and if you appeal that, they will hold up that expulsion. That is really important. They don't tell you that in the residence manual, right? So part 3, policy and inclusion. I've got about 17 minutes left. I think we're going to finish up a little bit early because I'm going to blow through this. For Leah, I have quoting here, the school also said Leah never informed officials about what she alleged was a poisoned environment on campus, so people making fun of her being raped. The university denies that there is a rampant rape culture and that it is permitted or tolerated as such. And that's all the tribunal needed to prove. All they had to do was say, I'm not aware of rape culture. And Leah's argument was completely dismissed, right? Second bullet point, the submissions say Leah was removed, quote, because of her conduct and behavior, not because of her disability. Accommodation of the applicant's medical needs were considered, but were beyond what TWU could provide. So that's the part of the policy that this kind of whole presentation sets up as an argument. My argument is that if you have an enablement policy where if students are presenting problems for you, you can just tell them to go home, you can't then say that residences are a home away from home. You can't say that there's robust mental health supports. You can't say that your needs will be considered on a one-on-one basis or they have accommodations for crises. You can't have both of those things. You can either say, we will help you while you are normally presenting or until you are a problem. Or you can offer all these options to students because they go very, very far out of their way to tell you how there they are for you until you need them to be there for you, and then they're gone, right? So, quote, they also say Leah was not alone among her classmates in requiring mental health support. No shit, right? TWU also feared that continuing in the program would be harmful to the applicant and to the other students, 3 of which also suffered from mental health issues, and 1 of which was also a victim of past sexual abuse. So that goes back to the mythology I was talking about in my own story, where once they've seen Leah, and Leah's gone to the media with this story so she can be recognized, they will start thinking about self-harm, or they will start thinking about rape, or they will start thinking about their mental illness, and she becomes a trigger for students that the university sees as normal. So that makes Leah the problem, and Leah needs to be removed from campus so these students, in this myth that doesn't work at all, won't think about any of those things and will therefore be productive and well-adjusted. That's what's happening over and over and over again. If you remove that problem student, all of the rest of them are fine. Not true, but, here we are. Eric's policy issue, the guy who cut himself twice and got expelled. After suicide attempt, police took him to the hospital. When he returned from his dorm, staff had booked him a hotel room. That should set off alarm bells for you based on my story, right? If you're put into a hotel from your university career has ended. Do not take a hotel room from a university. They told him they would meet him the next morning. That's when the university took action. So they had a board meeting, they voted, they expelled him. Well, he sat in that hotel room. Quote, a letter like the one Eric received is never justifiable and never acceptable. Andre Bourgeois, VP of Student Life, said in an interview. Thanks, Andre. Bourgeois said the Students' Union is aware of more than one case where a student was evicted under similar circumstances. Quote, I wouldn't say that I'm confident that the university will never make another mistake when it comes to suicide or mental health. That is as close as a VP is ever going to come to telling you this happens all the time. Okay? I need you to know that. Chatham students policy issue. We're going back in time, right? Quote, our self-harm protocol is designed to assist in identifying these at-risk students and help them receive the care and treatment they need. The protocol has key steps and guidelines for university and professional care staff to follow in order to determine on a case-by-case basis what is in the best interest of the student. So what I want you to interrogate there is the case-by-case basis. Every single one of these cases, and I could keep going. These aren't the only cases. These are the ones I can do in an hour. And last week, there were so many more stories posted online of exactly this happening. So when they say this is case by case, they're lying, okay? But 3 former Chatham students who self-injured while attending the school feel that the policy had the opposite effect and created an environment in which students try to hide mental health issues instead of seeking help. Obviously. When she was leaving campus, she says she would be treated like a threat to everyone. She had lived on campus and needed to pack up her belongings. The university assigned staff members to supervise her packing. They did that to me too. Nothing makes you feel like a criminal like 2 on-campus special constables watching you pack your shit and get out. They treated me like a criminal, like I was going to hurt someone, she said. I never did anything that suggested I was going to hurt anyone. I was just trying to hurt myself. So the informal policy here, and this is her words, but it's pretty accurate, keep it to yourself or leave the school. So the policy is built such that if you'd like to admit to considering self-harm or considering suicidality, you might as well remove yourself from campus because these policies are designed to remove you when you admit that. And that's a problem. Sarah's policy issue. We've finally come back to me toward the end, right? So a lot of this I've already told you. Students created a petition around the clause that was governing my expulsion, getting over 100 resident students to sign a statement saying they felt I was not dangerous or I would not cause them harm. Awful. That feels really bad when a petition's going around and people have to sign saying they don't feel you are violent. GSA president advocated at my hearing, which I didn't attend, I didn't give a statement, nothing, for the misapplication of the policy on traumatized students and its implications on mental health treatment protocols. Very interesting. I was banned from setting foot back on campus, the on-campus funeral, and collecting my things because I was determined to be a credible threat to other people on campus. So I didn't go to the funeral, I didn't go to my classes, I didn't go on residence. All my friends were on residence. They had to come visit me at the hotel until I was sent home. A VP wrote to me a year later to apologize for mishandling my case, but insisted it was a one-time event and a rare failing of procedure. And if I want you to take away one goddamn thing from this presentation, it's that it is not a one-time event, and that is the policy working as designed. Okay? So, you've got afterward for comments and participation. I'm aware this is a recording. You can't comment or participate. So with the last slide, I have the standard completion of suicide warning. If for some reason you're thinking of that or know somebody who is, please reach out to them. There's a number of helplines there. We've got Crisis Services Canada. If you're thinking of completing suicide or self-harming, do not go to health services. Do not tell your students to go to health services. Do not send them to counseling services. They will enable these clauses, and they will be arrested, and they will be expelled. I have been arrested 3 times for admitting that I felt suicidal while I was at Wilfrid Laurier. It happens over and over, and that's the policy. That's how it's designed to work. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to your student. You need to be mobilizing off-campus resources that will not take away their education. That's really important, okay? You have a number of contact information pieces there if you want to contact me directly. I cannot put you in contact with the people I interviewed, but some of their stories are public, particularly Leah's. Leah's gone on record a number of times. There are people in the last week who have gone on record. I'm going to give you some of their stories via the Discord channel this week instead of the readings that I gave you originally, because I think what's come out last week is more important for you to see than the readings that I had originally assigned. Okay? And I'm going to double check that I don't have a right space for you this week. I don't think you do. Right space 6, critical review of self-selected video essay. No, that's not on this course. So that shouldn't be there. You do not have a right space this week. I will put the Echoes of Poverty link in your Discord because that's an interesting working class initiative that deals with some of these problems and how to support people who do get expelled for, being dangerous insofar as being mentally ill. And then I'll do a breakdown as a live document instead of as a video, because I think as a live document, it could work for you as a kind of note-taking exercise, or you can make a collaborative document in your team to try to help out the notes I've given you. Okay? So there's no right space this week. You just had your lecture. We canceled the right space last week, so that's awesome, right? And next week is reading week. So I'm going to give you the wellness check-in that I hope you complete, because I really do read them all. I really do want to know what you're thinking, I promise. I'm very interested. And I want to know how you're doing. I could be better. I'll be honest with you. I'm not having a great time. But I hope that you have community around you and resources around you and decompression around you to be able to make the best you can out of the collective bad time we're all having. And that's also why I'm going a lot easier on the homework, because I just don't think the homework is very important in the long run when we're having insurrections and general pandemic madness, etc., So then after reading week, we're going to do another writer's workshop activity. We're going to do a couple more right spaces, another read around, a couple more right spaces, and you're done. That's really exciting, isn't it? Let me check the time. We got 5 minutes left, and I don't need it. You have a short lecture this week. Thank you for being empathetic about this lecture and about the content from this lecture. This lecture sucks for me to give every time, so I'm really thankful that however you're sitting in space right now, you're doing that in a way that doesn't jeopardize or otherwise trivialize my own lived experience. I really appreciate that. And the lived experiences of other people on this PowerPoint, because that's important too, right? So, I won't see you next week, but I'll be checking in with you with the wellness check. I hope you keep well. You are so loved by me and everyone in your circle. And if you need to decompress, please do so. I'll be doing that too.